Hello, Billy Reeves here. Welcome to episode 171 of the Kscope Podcast. Tim Bowness joins the label as a solo artist. So, as we build up to the release of his album Powder Dry out on the 16th of August, he and I had a chat about his influences, collaborations, future plans as well for his new time at his new home at Kscope. So we'll give the new singles a spin, but start with a song from No Man. Yes, Tim, no stranger to Kscope Towers. Here he is with his buddy Stephen Wilson from the album Schoolyard Ghosts, Wherever There Is Light.
Jane passes through the crowd, outside the Mercury Lounge. She loves the city sounds, she feels that she's been found. Wherever there is light, she follows. Wherever there is light, she follows. Bats are out again, kids shout in summer rain. For real, imagine shame, for things they cannot name. Of all their bright tomorrows, wherever there is light, she follows.
No Man from 2008, Tim Bowness as collaborator, the beautiful Wherever There Is Light, on to 2024, and Tim Bowness solo star. played all the instruments on this, if you're your own producer and there's no one saying, right, we need the album now, it's finished, because all great art is only ever abandoned, it's never finished. How do you know when to stop?
I wrote this in kind of two or three chunks of really intense activity where I'd be writing sort of 10 songs a time almost through that. And I certainly knew that when I'd written the first 20, I'd not quite written what I needed to for an album. And it was when I'd written the third lot, I thought, okay, it's all here. I've just got to assemble this into something that's coherent. And with the songs themselves, when you're the producer, and I tend, luckily, because I think I'm primarily a singer and a songwriter, hopefully I'm always working towards the song and the sonics. So a lot of this album, a lot of the pieces are very short because that's what they needed to be. I'm never going to extend it for the sake of extending it. I'm never going to write a song for the sake of writing a song. So everything was kind of as I felt it needed to be.
Yeah, I kind of got the nod from Kscope that something was happening with Tim Bowness, and there were clues as well, wasn't there, because you were out with a new live band. Who is in this group, please?
Well, the group that doesn't appear on the album, a fine bunch of lads. Matt Stevens from Fierce the Dead, who's a tremendous player. Andy Edwards, the drummer, who started off as a kind of teenage prodigy with Robert Plant. John Jowett on bass, and the son of Kelly Grocott from ELO on keyboards, guitar. And I always refer to him as the Swiss Army knife of the band because he's like the glue that holds it all together and can play every instrument.
The multi-talented Rob Grocott. So if Rob is the Swiss Army knife, who's the House of Lords? Are you, I guess? Are you the governor? Do you throw your weight around with these boys?
It looks like it, yeah.
So with you playing with the band now, having played all the instruments on the record yourself, are the live versions different?
Oh, very different. I mean, almost completely different. I guess I've never been particularly precious about the studio recordings because I think you've got to work to the strength of the live band. And luckily, this is a very strong live band that manages to sort of inhabit the material and make it their own, really. And I guess as well, I allow a lot of freedom within that. So obviously the song kind of has to exist, but it's very different sometimes from the studio recording because you kind of want it to live and breathe. And so when we perform it, even every version of a piece can be very different. So it can be 2 minutes or 5 minutes depending on how we feel and how the audience is receiving the material.
Because you've worked with templates before. I mean, I guess there's a certain discipline with working with backing tracks with computers. I mean, how much freedom can you give them? Because if you say to someone, in my experience, if you say to someone, hey man, do your thing, they don't know how to please you. Whereas if you say, make it sound like Robert Smith on a horse.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of easier. I mean, I'm sure they're keen to please.
I think it's sort of, it depends on the musicians, really. I mean, I've always been quite lucky to work with musicians who've kind of got their own identity and can improvise as well as play set pieces. And obviously, I've worked with click tracks and backing tracks and computer generated music, and I quite enjoy that. It's a lot more disciplined. It's a lot more restrictive as well, but you can do things within it. But in some ways, it's kind of nicer to let the material roam free and allow the musicians to play with the possibilities of it.
I guess also it means that you're proud of your compositions, I guess, in a way, aren't you? It's like sending your children off to school, isn't it?
I suppose so, yeah, but you don't know how they're going to grow up, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. They've got involved with a bunch of rough kids like Big Mac Stevens. Everybody that knows me knows what a massive fan I am of Matt and his band and his solo stuff. And, he comes from quite a different background to you, perhaps. I know he grew up with, obviously, really digging the extremes of metal. And your music, I think, it doesn't really have that background. How did you start? What got you playing music to start with?
It's really difficult because my sort of tastes are incredibly eclectic. As I think anyone who listens to the album years will hear, both Stephen and I had very broad tastes that involved anything from classical to folk to jazz to electronic to prog to pure singer-songwriters, to kind of Nigerian music, Fela Kuti. So I think we were always kind of very open to influences and to other music. And I think that, I said this to you before, that for me, I was always attracted to music that was either incredibly pure, spiritual in terms of its approach. So something like Talk, Mark Hollis almost seemed to be reaching towards a certain silence in his music. And I think you can hear that kind of focus in the music of Blue Nile, Sylvian, Scott Walker, Van Morrison. And I guess that is one aspect that I'm really drawn to. But equally, I've always been drawn to that kind of Prince, David Bowie, Miles Davis, where they're this antenna just receiving all sorts of information from everywhere. And I guess that when I first worked with Stephen, he was one of the first people I knew who was also like that. We could lose ourselves in one idea, almost this kind of Nick Drake idea of singer-songwriter, innocence, purity, the space. But then equally, we just, when we first started working together in the late 80s, would be drawn to what maybe the Swans were doing at the time, or as Stephen always corrects me at this point, Swans.
I guess also your Bowie and your Miles Davis and Prince were happy to make a pony album, whereas perhaps your Talks and all the rest of it were trying to make the perfect album. And I guess your music, is a bit of both. You happy to make a pony? You happy to take some chances and make a pony album?
I'm happy to take chances. Obviously, I'm not quite sure I want to make that pony album, because everything for me, is a kind of a result of quite an intense obsession. When I get involved in an album, it's everything to me at that point of making the album. And I guess that, my albums do reflect the extremes, and that you'll get albums like No Man's Together with Stranger, or my solo album Late Night Laments, which are extremely, if you like, mono-focused in terms of the mood, the subjects, even the textures that are investigated. And so it's almost aiming at that kind of, as we say, talk-esque purity. But then, quite a number of albums like, say, Butterfly Mind or No Man's Wild Opera, I think are just kind of responding to the energy that is around me. And hopefully I'm kind of spewing that back in a distinctive way, I always like Dennis Potter's description of his work, which I think is closer to the Mark Hollis, Paul Buchanan, Scott Walker approach, which is that he had a field and he would just wander around that same field, picking little bits and finding a new blade of grass that he hadn't discovered before. So he was always finding fresh features in the same field of investigation. And I suppose because, like Stephen, I've got a certain musical ADHD, I want the entire farm.
When summer comes, it will begin again. When summer comes, it will have changed. When summer comes, when summer comes, you were hungry and you were good. There was a love and you were lost. When summer comes, when summer comes, Turned it on its side, turned it inside out. Turned it till it turned love away. Innocent and small and new to it all. When summer comes, you will have changed. Always out of sight, always out of reach, always in the corner of your eye. When summer comes.
That all of those things that you described and all of those influences you've described are in this album. Was that deliberate?
I don't think anything's ever deliberate, because when I write, it's an incredibly instinctive process and quite an emotional process. And certainly with this album, I just kind of, I think I wrote it in sort of 2 or 3 bursts of activity when I just couldn't stop writing. And what was great about it is I found myself investigating musical territories I didn't think I would be when I started the process. So it was a real, investigative approach that took me to new territory, or at least it felt like that anyway. And so there's no sense of self-consciously determining what I'm going to do or where I'm going to do. I'm just kind of following the mood. So when I made, say, Together with Stranger or Late Night Laments, that was exactly the music I wanted to make at that point. That monofocus was all encompassing. Whereas with this, whether it's kind of, living this era of 24-hour news feeds, social media, and so many attacks on our attention, I found that what was coming out was incredibly fragmented and diverse. But when I was putting the album together, it was like 30 attempts to get it right. I mean, I'd written about an hour's worth of material, probably 26 pieces, and I even dropped some of the pieces that might have been the strongest, because the album felt better this way. It was definitely built with a certain arc, a certain dynamic arc. So I was very aware of how it would musically translate when I was putting the album together. And I guess it was playing with extremes of sort of quietness, loudness, experimentation, accessibility, and hopefully coming across, as a coherent whole, because, I'm a real stickler for the album. For me, the album should be a 35 to 45 minute experience, because I think that's the best length to sort of truly immerse yourself in certain types of intensity.
You got into, intense, high artistic music at quite a young age, not listening to the pop groups of the time when you were a teen.
No. Well, I was very, obviously, like a lot of kids, I got into pop music. The first bands that I'd have really, really loved were obviously the Beatles, McCartney, 10cc. And then I think what was interesting is that the Beatles and McCartney, 10cc were fantastic because they were so eclectic and drew on so many influences. And I guess I was always quite curious, and that kind of led me to progressive jazz, classical, folk singer-songwriter. And so, in my teens, I was going to concerts by people like Peter Hamill, Roy Harper, jazz musicians like Eberhard Weber, John Sermon. And luckily, because I kind of had a relatively dysfunctional childhood, I was allowed to do what I wanted when I wanted. And I lived relatively near Manchester and Liverpool, which were fantastic places for music when I was growing up.
You must have been the youngest punter in.
Sometimes, yeah. I think as I've often said, one gig I went to at the Blue Kite in Liverpool, it was sold out. I think it was Jan Garbarek, and it got to myself and my friend, and we just got in. And the people behind us who were sort of, we were in our teens, they were in their 30s, were going, "We know more jazz than they do. Don't let them in." And luckily, luckily, the guards or the bouncers, they let us in.
Yeah, well, they obviously felt sorry for you.
And
two little lads in
I'd
short
like
trousers.
to think that they beat up the jazz snobs just for us, but I'm not sure that happened.
I could imagine them going, God, blimey, we had angelic upstarts here last week. I'm not expecting any trouble tonight. And then you, Curly Tim, turns up.
Garbarek, yeah. So,
Cool. Oh, the jazz lot, they're a bit feisty, aren't they? Punch ups about solos. How did you choose the singles? There's been two. Right? How do you do that with a Tim Bowness album? Because obviously it's quite handy. You can lead off with a single. It's especially useful in the digital age that you can kind of tease the record, without the pressure of it having to be on Radio 1 with such an eclectic mix of songs. How did you and Kscope decide what we're gonna lead it off?
This was really difficult, I think, with this album, because I think most of my albums maybe have 2 or 3 obvious tracks that perhaps are going to be the attempt at getting radio play or the attempt at getting interest outside of my audience. But this album, I think, probably had about sort of 6 or 7 possibilities of tracks that could maybe be the best lead-off piece. And it was really, really difficult, because I think it does go from the experimental to perhaps the most accessible I've ever been. And really, I suppose, that was part of a dialogue between myself and Johnny and Sarah at Kscope, really.
It's really great to have you on Kscope. It just seems like a logical place to be. Is there going to be a kind of series of albums for Kscope? Have you got plans for that? What happens next?
To be honest, I've no idea. I mean, I've been writing since I've completed the album. And of course, albums tend to be either extensions of what's gone before them or complete repudiations. And I think with this album, Butterfly Mind was quite eclectic. And this is even more eclectic. It's like if Butterfly Mind was a starting point, this goes off in myriad directions. And yet, since I've done it, I've been writing much more sedate, intricate guitar instrumentals, actually, which I'm sure I'll develop into songs. So I've no idea what I'm going to do in terms of music. I mean, I've also been recording with the band as well, because it's such a fantastic band. And what I love about them is that they've got this incredible dynamic range. They can go from a whisper to a scream.
Shows?
I'm headlining a festival in late July in Cheltenham, and I'm headlining a festival in London in December. And then I think there's going to be a mini European tour in early 2025, and that's going to be the first European tour I've done since before the pandemic. So that'll be interesting.
Where do you do your best business?
Where do I do it live? Really difficult to know. There are certain venues that are always very, very nice and very encouraging. So, there's the Border in Zoetermeer is always quite nice. But Poland has always been one of the places where there's been an incredibly warm welcome to No Man especially. And Italy as well. When I played in places like Perugia or Rome, it's always an incredibly sort of open and enthusiastic audience. So a lot of formerly Catholic or formerly Soviet bloc countries, really.
Or in Poland's case, both. I was trying to make the connection between those two, and of course you marry us in Poland as well. I think there's a certain simpatico with you.
Yeah. Well, I think I think perhaps there is. I think certain cultures invite a certain response to music, and perhaps there's a kind of emotional quality in what I do that appeals to certain sensibilities.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I also think you were talking about your influences there, and I think if there is Kscope is quite a wide-ranging label, but it's a label that's keen to present music as premium product, is the way I always put it. There's a certain sophistication about the acts on the label, but I think if there is one thing that that connects them, perhaps it's not an obsession with the American tradition or the British take on that. There is a bit more of a European, and I mean that as a massive compliment. There is a bit more of a European feel to what you do. I think Talk were like that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes that can have appeal beyond its own bass. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I like about Kscope is that, generally speaking, it doesn't have a particular idea of how anyone should sound. So if you're talking about Mariusz, if you're talking about Bruce, if you're talking about Stephen Wilson, if you're talking about myself, we could all do anything from an acoustic album to a purely electronic album to a funk album to a conceptual classic rock album, that all of us have got very eclectic tastes and interests, and it could come out in any number of ways. And I guess that's kind of exciting, that there's a certain unpredictability and openness about a lot of the artists that Kscope attract.
Picking quarrels, cards in trouble, feeling silence, bursting bubbles, misdirecting, changing tack, on the pain, displace the facts, remove the signs, disrupt the history. Don't want you till they don't walk. Don't need you, then they won't walk. When they say walk, you walk. Walk. When they say walk, you walk. The moment deranged, our empathy drained. Agreements in flames, the arguments framed, just so. A casual word, a lasting injury. They'll want you till they don't walk. They'll need you, then they won't walk. When they say walk, you walk. Walk. When they say walk, you walk.
Tim Bowness from Powder Dry. That's entitled Rock Hudson, which was the first single, which came out a few weeks ago. And before that, you heard the more recent single, When Summer Comes. The album is out on the 16th of August and it's ready to pre-order right now. And in other returning to the fold news, if you've been following the Kscope headlines, you will have seen that there's new music coming from an artiste called the Radicant, which is the new moniker of the Ex Anathema frontman, Mr. Vincent Cavanagh. And this new incarnation fuses songcraft and sound design, uniting hybrid electronica, Vincent's marvellous and very catchy vocals, with some serious, heavy, low end. Here's the first single, Zero Blue, from the upcoming EP, which is entitled We Ascend, which is out on the 12th of July. Thanks very much for listening. Billy Reeves here. More of this sort of thing next time on the Kscope Podcast. Ta-ta!